Hi, everyone. This week I wanted to focus on some of the underpinnings and the philosophy of special education. In the first two chapters, there is quite a bit of information about the history of special education, where we are today, what the law says, etc. But as you will see in the assignment that I've given you, I've asked you to think a lot about your philosophy for being in special education, what that means to serving students, what it means to your role. I have a few things there about normalization. I'm really old, so I remember when normalization was a very progressive concept. In fact, probably got a bit of blowback from people because when I was young in the field, everybody was segregated. I mean, we had special education classrooms. Oftentimes, we had special schools. So the idea of putting students, particularly those with moderate disabilities, in the same classroom with students without disabilities would have been insane. I mean, really, I think people would have just thought you'd lost your mind. That was never even a consideration. We did some mainstreaming, which means that from time to time, we would put students in classrooms where they might succeed outside of special education, much like you see now when people talk about specials. I kind of hate that term because all those things are part of the school curriculum, but anyway, we call them specials. So we put kids in things like that a lot, but we did not put them in circumstances where either academically they would perform with their typically age peers, or we would put them in circumstances, in a sense, just to be next to people. And I don't mean that to be disparaging, but in a way, it was like, if we just co-locate people, then things will happen. It wasn't really thought through in the way that, at least in my experience, that it was really any kind of really difficult or in-depth planning. It was sort of a fly by the seat of our pants. Let's see if a kid does good in this class, etc. Well, anyway, I've made my point. Now we're all the way to looking at inclusion, and that model brings with it a lot of dissent and good dissent. I mean, there are we haven't worked it out yet. Okay, in fact, as I like to say about inclusion, let's not blame the model. Let's blame the state of the public schools. In other words, if we had kid classrooms, let's say, with 12 students, 18 students even, with a portion of those students having more significant learning needs, we could manage it. It's doable. And it's quite successful. However, when you're asking a teacher to put those type of students with 30 other students and asking them to make significant modifications to help the student be in the classroom, it's really taxing. So oftentimes when we hear inclusion doesn't work, what we're really hearing is we've never implemented the model correctly. Okay? The same thing is true of universal design for learning. We often call it UDL. I have a little section there, a IRIS module for you to complete about that. And universal design for learning expands upon the concepts that we have had in the past, which is like, for example, the least restrictive environment, which is where we want to place people normalize. By the way, that word normalization never meant to make normal. It meant to normalize circumstances. I think it's probably the language is probably a little dated now. But anyway, I just make it clear that that's not what that means. We're not. It's what's normal. Okay, but it's more like making circumstances as typical as what would be for people without disabilities. I probably should have said that sooner. Anyway, UDL in some ways is just another example of how we're trying to make the curriculum as available to students as we can. So it's about the way we represent, or students represent their learning. It's the way that we present learning. And that's why I asked you to take a little look at UDL because it's a big and important concept in special education today. I wrote this down, but let me be clear. In that Iris module, there's several places where you can answer questions. I'm not asking you to do that. All I want you to do is to take the Barsh inventory. I took it. Some of the questions, I have to be honest, are a little odd. But when I got my score, it certainly reflected my learning styles. And that's why I asked you just to take it and see what kind of a learner you are. The main reason that I asked you to do that is because we tend to teach the way we learn. I'm a talker, I'm an explainer, I'm very visual learner. One of the examples I use all the time is if you if I get something from IKEA that I have to put together, I can assure you I'm going to mess it up pretty fast. Mainly because I very ADD and I don't like reading directions and as soon as I get about 3 sentences in, I say, "Oh, I know what I'm doing." And then I mess things up. When people show me how to do it, okay, I don't need the directions. Show me how to do it and I'm good to go, right? That's my learning style. The thing is, this is hard for me. I'll use professional development as an example, not teaching. The way that I present to audiences oftentimes is not probably best practice. I tend to be a lecturer. I tend to be like old school, take notes, hear what I have to say. I'm the expert in this circumstance. That's why you've asked me to be here. But I get feedback a lot. Like you should have had a group activity. You should have had more learner participation. Blah 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 blah. Okay, I love to sit and hear people lecture. I mean, if they're interesting, I like to hear them and I like to listen and I like to take notes. And that's how I like to learn. So, therefore, too often, that's how I teach. So, it's just important to know what your learning styles are. So, if you're not terribly kinesthetic, movement, things in your body, then you're probably not going to pay attention to active or more activity based learning opportunities that use the body. I mean, just for example, if you were in the younger years, you might help kids make a dance or something, or sing a song in which they dance, but they're counting steps, right? Or they're using letters or something like that, right? That's a means of representation that demonstrates knowledge, but it's not writing it on a piece of paper for a student who's dysgraphic and has a hard time with writing, or a student who might have cerebral palsy who is either can't write or it's very laborious to write. So when you look at UDL, to me, it's like another example of least restrictive environment. What we're saying is that you deserve to be in this classroom. We believe we have what it takes to teach you and to support you. And therefore, this becomes even more the least restrictive environment because we are modifying our curriculum to make it that you can participate not just at the level at which you're able, meaning cognitively and things like that, but in the best ways that we can assess you. Okay? Like I'm a better talker than a writer. Like I think I write okay, but writing's hard for me. Like I sit and like that. But then I can talk it out. I've heard more people go, "You should write a book." I'm like, "Are you kidding? I don't know if I can't write a book." They're like, "You know so much stuff." For some reason, verbally, I can just I can put it out there. So I mean, if somebody said to me, "You don't have to write a paper for this class, but if you come in for an hour and talk about this, you'll pass it." I'd take the hour conversation. That'd scare most people. Oh, I'm not going to go sit in front of a professor for an hour. Are you kidding me? Right? It would scare a lot of people. For me, that would be the bomb. I would be like, right on it. So, my point is, we all come at the way we learn and the way we provide. That's not the right word. Well, I should say the way we act, what we give back, our responses. That's what I was saying. The way we provide those, whether it's verbally, writing, etc., um, oftentimes says more about what our comfort is. And if we're doing assessment or we're trying to understand what a student knows, it's oftentimes more important to just get that information than it is to get it the way that we might want it. So, for example, we might lead students toward being able to write these responses and sorts of things because that's really the way schools do it, but we want to get them there. And at the beginning, if we only focus on things that are difficult for them to do in terms of their ability to respond, then we're really failing them and failing ourselves because we don't really get what they know. Okay, I think I've made that clear. So in this, I believe I don't have it in front of me. I think there's like 7 questions for you to do, and then the Iris module. Um, and in those questions, I've just tried to get you to think a little more about the underpinnings, the philosophies, the way that we move in special education today, and the way we need to move. We have lots of areas in which we still are not doing our best when it comes to treating students with disabilities in a typical fashion. Okay? I'll tell you something that embarrasses me, but I'll tell you what. I had a chance to go to a school in Norway, and there was a young girl. It was an elementary school, and she was in a wheelchair and very disabled. And what I mean by that is physically, you could tell she had very limited move. It appeared to be like cerebral palsy. I don't know that that's what it was, but she was clearly very affected in her physical movement, etc. And I think from what I saw them doing, she probably had cognitive impairment too. And so they had this young girl in this separate place where there was somebody working with her somehow. And I said to the woman, "Oh, is that the special education classroom? Is that where she goes to schools?" And she literally looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" And she pointed to this class over here, and she goes, "She's in the third grade. That's her class." I was really kind of horrified because I teach this stuff, and all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh, that must be the special ed room." In Norway, they just don't make that distinction. You're in the third grade, and that means if whatever your needs are, you're in the third grade. And I wish that we could get to that kind of thinking. And that's what I'm pushing you toward. I want you just to kind of explore your own thinking about these things so that maybe you will be the generation behind me that pushes for even more appropriate and relevant services for our students. Okay, so I hope that just gives you a brief overview of what I want you to work on this week. Last, the discussion section, I just asked you to talk about your special education philosophy. I listed like 2 or 3 questions there as examples. You can answer those if you want. If you don't have to, because I'd like you just to tell me more about your philosophy. And for the responses, I'm sorry, for the replies to the reply, when you reply to somebody, comment about what either you notice about their philosophy that's appealing, or what you share in terms of philosophy, etc. It's not a lame conversation to have, because it's really our philosophy that leads us to act the way we act. More importantly, it's the philosophy of others that lead them to act the way they act. So when we're co-teaching or when we're collaborating, sometimes it's kind of helpful to go, where is this person coming from, right? What is their philosophy? Oftentimes, we all think we start from the same philosophy. We want to help the kids. We want to do what's right. I mean, good things, but kind of, that kind of stuff. Not very in depth. So that's why I'm just asking you to think about your own philosophy. What does it mean? Why are you here? What do you think about students? Like, what do you want to achieve? What do you want them to achieve? Those kinds of questions. So I look forward to seeing those responses. And I will be back next week to talk to you about week 3. And I look forward to that. If you have questions or need more information regarding the requirements I've set forth in these assignments, please let me know. Thanks a lot.